Oh. And we're muted.
Okay. Welcome everybody to tonight's overview and scrutiny meeting. As usual, it's a hybrid meeting. It will take place over Microsoft Teams and it will be broadcast on YouTube. We do have one virtual attendee tonight who is Councillor Wesson. And can I say to you, Councillor Wesson, if you would like to speak, please raise your hand, and at other times, please mute your mic. So I'll go on to item 1, which is apologies for absence and substitutions. I have one notification of apologies from Councillor Haley, and Councillor Arwall is substituting. I've also had 2 apologies for lateness from Councillor Anand and Councillors Gordon, but they will be joining us soon. Councillor Bacalina?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Councillor Wesson sends his apologies.
Yeah,
I don't think he's going to be online.
Oh, he's not going to be online?
No.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bacalini. Right, so item 2, declarations of interest. Do we have any? Nope. Thank you. There are not matters to be considered in private. And item 4, can we agree the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of January, please? Thank you. So I'll move on to item 5, which is the budget strategy for 26-27, and I'll welcome Emily Hill, our Strategic Director of Resources, and Councillor Steve Donnelly, our Cabinet Member for Inclusive Economy. I'll hand over to you, Emily. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll just try to share the presentation on the screen. I'm just going to try to make it a bit bigger. Oh, I think it's just got a bit of a delay. There you go. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. You'll be aware that the budget report is a very long report, so I've prepared a presentation to try to summarise the key matters for your attention, but clearly happy to answer any questions on the full report that you might have. So I'm going to pick up quickly some key messages, context in which we set the budget this year, how the Council's gone about balancing that budget, and then finish with risk and financial resilience. I've actually got a brief update as well on the final settlement. The provisional settlement was the budget, that was what we based the budget papers on. The final settlement was published on Monday, so I can give you just a quick update on that too. So I'll tell you sort of the key messages, and then we'll go into the detail as we go through the presentation. You'll be aware, or certainly members of this committee over the years will be aware, of the legacy of real terms funding reductions, which we have. We've had significant real terms funding reductions over the last more than 10 years now, decade. And whilst those reductions have been experienced, we've also seen the demand for our services increase and the costs of those services increase. The committee is aware that we were expecting funding reform this year because we took a paper towards the end of last year. And the outcome of that funding reform is good news for Ealing, and that's not the case across the country. It's a variable impact on different councils, but it's good news for Ealing with a real terms funding increase. And I'll tell you how much that is. I won't spoil the surprise now as we go through the paper. And not only is there an increase in 26-27, but there's the total increase in sort of our need is spread over 3 years. So we see increases now over the next 3 years. So that's good news. We do, however, continue to have challenges in our social care demand and costs and temporary accommodation, and that has driven overspends in 25-26, this current financial year, that we will need to make sure we address in the budget. And there is good news in the settlement, but in the settlement, both provisional and final, government and its expectations of our increases in what it calls core spending power relies on increases in council tax. So the government expectation is that we will increase council tax, and even more so, the funding formula which government calculates our grant funding also includes assumptions around the level of our council tax. But happily, as a result, we're able to propose a balanced budget, which sort of balances off that additional government funding, council tax, income and savings, while maintaining investment in specific local priorities and discretionary services, and indeed with that new funding, providing some new investment in universal frontline services this year. So that's the key messages, and I'll take you into some of the detail. So usually at this point, I would give you lots of graphs on our real terms funding cuts. I think this year that has changed, so I won't go through that in detail, but only to remind you of the real terms funding cuts that we've experienced. As I say, remind you of the financial pressures from those demand-led services, adult social care, children's, and in more recent years, particularly temporary accommodation. And it isn't just those demand-led services that have had increases in costs. We've had high levels of inflation, which has increased those financial pressures. And as a result of those reductions in funding, but increasing pressures, what we've seen over the past sort of 10 years is the squeezing of those universal non-demand-led services. In addition, in that national context this year, 30 councils received exceptional financial support. So 30 councils said they were unable to balance their budget with the resources available to them and therefore needed exceptional financial support. And most councils have been unable really to undertake any real medium-term financial planning because we had continued annual settlements rather than medium-term settlements. And as we said previously at the end of last year, funding reform was last updated in 2013-14, so over a decade ago, when clearly circumstances, need and population were very different. So this graph just reminds you really of how our budget has had to, it's changed in terms of its makeup and how it's sort of primarily now committed, I guess, through those demand-led services. So you see actually between adults, children's and homelessness, back in 2020, we had less than half of our spend related to those demand-led services. We're now looking at it taking almost 2/3 of our spend. So that's the point that we talked about in relation to those universal services, you know, highways, waste, other support service and discretionary services being squeezed down from 41% to less than a quarter. So we talked about fair funding being the first update of allocations at 2013-14. This is now reflected in our provisional settlement, and it's two key elements. One was the business rates reset, which you'll remember related to revenues that councils have been able to keep over those 10 years because their business rates growth allowed them to. That wasn't because they had a higher level of need, but because that business rates retention system allowed them to keep the growth in their business rates. What's happened in the business rates reset is that money that they've held as growth gets pooled into the central pot and now gets reallocated based on need. And then a revised funding formula to reach a settlement funding assessment. That talks about relative needs, relative resource and transitional arrangements. They're pretty complicated formula, but if we take it at its simplest form, relative needs relate to characteristics and particularly the size of our population and its deprivation. So our sort of needs are assessed through our population characteristics. Our relative resource is the amount of money the government thinks we should be able to raise through council tax. So that uses a nominal level of council tax rather than our own. And then transitional arrangements are in place so that any local authority, particularly that loses money, because if some gain money, others are going to lose money, that's slowly filtered in over 3 years so that no local authority has a significant shock in any particular year. And what does that mean for us then? What did the provisional settlement say? So Actually, Ealing's population has grown relatively quicker than most other councils. And so that increase in population has increased our share of the funding. And very particularly, we have increased in terms of our measure of deprivation. So the government has now changed the calculation of the indices of multiple deprivation to include housing costs in its income analysis. As you might expect in London, that means that most of London councils are more deprived on this index than they were previously, because housing costs are such a big element of an individual's income or residual income. So both those population and deprivation factors increase Ealing's share of the funding, and we are assessed to have a need for £60 million more, but in line with those transitional arrangements, that's phased in over 3 years, which is a grant of roughly 20 million in each of the next 3 years. In addition to that sort of core funding, CSP funding, there are increases in other ring-fence grants. So that's Crisis and Resilience Fund, Public Health, Homelessness and Children's Prevention. And whilst all of this is very good news, just a reminder now that we've got this 3-year settlement, in that we're expected to manage now inflationary increases within there. There won't be additional further increases in our funding. So that's good news. I have to balance that, I guess, with where we are and the expectations, really, that 20 million sounds like a lot of money. If you look at our Q3 financial monitoring, which we reported in the same cabinet pack tomorrow, you can see here that we have significant overspends in those demand-led services specifically, but also across the council, of £19 million. So essentially, without undertaking further work to mitigate those demand-led costs, that 20 million could be sort of swallowed up immediately. Now, that's not the case in the budget. What we have done is try to mitigate some of those demands, but this is trying to show you and identify that there are risks in relation to demand-led services, and that they can be quite significant in terms of that £20 million additional funding. So how did we go about balancing the budget? So the budget has increasing costs, and then it needs to either decrease costs or generate additional income. We've had to identify inflation on pay, contracts, and this year very specifically utilities. We hadn't increased utilities budget since COVID because we had hoped that they would come back down to pre-COVID levels. After such a long time, they haven't, and so clearly we needed to review those utilities budgets and update them. I've talked about increasing demand for social care and homelessness and other increased costs to meet statutory duties, for example, property insurance. Unusually, because we haven't had the money to do that, the budget also includes increased costs for priority areas for investment. So we've got a number of areas of investment in the budget, which perhaps we haven't been able to do previously without the funding available to us. And we have to then, after increasing all of our costs for those things, we need to then bring it back down to balance. So there's an inflationary increased fees and charges. There was a reduction in pension contributions following our triennial pension valuation. There are a number of directorate-led savings, but actually in this financial year, there are very few new directorate-led savings. There are savings that have been approved in previous years. There's some corporately led efficiency savings in some specific areas that I'll pick up later. We've talked about the additional grant funding, and we've also talked about an expectation by government on increases in council tax. So when you put all of those increases in costs and take away all the income and savings, we're left with a balanced budget. I've got a few slides on those, which I'll flick through because I've probably talked about most of them here, but we'll just take through each of those elements. So this is breaking down the inflation. We've got 6.5 million, about 3.4% in terms of staff cost, but that does include a sort of adjustment to the budget last year where we didn't quite have enough in terms of our pay inflation, as we'd budgeted. Contract inflation and, as I talked about earlier, utility increases in utility costs. That's more detail there. Budget pressures and investments. So most of these areas, as you can see, that the additional costs are running into these demand-led services of housing, children's and adult social care. And a big one of those pressures in adult social care being ongoing commitment to fund the real living wage. Okay, we talked about, and this is unusual, so I had to add a slide into my usual pack, the additional investments that we've put into the budget this year, and they relate primarily to those universal services which have been squeezed. That sort of red area of that graph. So it's trying to redress some of the balance, I guess, in there. And they include investments in community safety, cleaner streets, playground and leisure facilities, and particularly because of the increase in council tax, increase in discretionary council tax awards. So all of those pressures investments are included in Appendix 2 of the report, and they're detailed on a line-by-line basis. The fees and charges, again, are in detailed line-by-line basis in Appendix 3, but essentially the approach to do that has been just to increase by September CPI, the September index, essentially for inflation. There are some very specific changes in the fees and charges as a result of some of the investments that have gone in, relating particularly to bulky waste and garden waste. And then the savings. I think I've probably picked these up, but this will tell you more about the quantum of the savings. And our biggest saving this year is in relation to the pension contribution rate following the triennial review of our pension fund. So that review, the actuarial valuation, shows that the pension fund now is in a surplus position, and that means our council contribution rates reduce, so that we return that essentially back to the council. The other new savings in what we call corporate programmes, and we've got corporate programmes looking at efficiency in our workforce, contracts and commissioning, and digital and technology, and they amount to 4.5 million. As I said, the other savings have been savings that largely have agreed in previous years and are continuing programmes. In terms of council tax base, council tax, there's two sort of increases in council tax. The first is the growth in council tax base, so that is more properties within the council which we can levy council tax on, and the second is the political decision to raise council tax. With the proposal is to do that in line with the council tax referendum, so that the expectation that government sets when it talks about increases in core spending power, the money available to councils to undertake their statutory duties, and that 5% will raise 9 million, just over £9 million. So this is the table which shows the directorate budgets after all of that. So you can see sort of increases within our expenditure and our funding for there. There's changes in the makeup of our funding because of funding reform. You would have used to have seen a table from me which had each grant on a line-by-line basis with 1 year's amount and then another year's amount. The fair funding reform means that all of those different grants are now consolidated into RSG, so you can't compare that on a line-by-line basis anymore. This is just telling you sort of essentially how that funding, how we fund our budget through retained business rates, council tax. I mean, it does show, councils are expected to fund significant amounts of their revenue from council tax income, and also the revenue support grant, the new revenue support grant. You can see that's changed there from 22 to 101, and that's that reflection of that grant consolidation. Previously, we had a whole list of other grants that's now been consolidated into RSG. So a good settlement, a balanced budget, but as we see from Q3, we still need to, there's still a number of risks, and that remains particularly in demand-led services. The demand-led services and delivery of our savings programmes, particularly in the context of those increasing demands. We've got a number of other risks. You'll know that previously we've had sort of a windfall really in relation to our treasury income because we've had high cash balances and high interest rates. We've now modelled a lot of that out. Of course, if interest rates fall faster than we modelled, that will reduce income even further. You can read the other ones on the screen. I think a couple of things that are very specific to Ealing is that we have relatively high debt levels compared to our counterparts, and that does provide us with less flexibility in the event that we need to identify further savings because those costs are fixed. And we also have a relatively low level of reserves, with the 12th lowest out of 33 boroughs, even though we've done a really good job, I think, in previous years of making budgeted contributions to try to improve our resilience. I think I tell you a little bit more about that now. This is the SIPFA, which is the Public Finance Institute Financial Resilience Index. You will be used to seeing us a bit further down this end of the table. So we've done really well in improving our comparative position, and we seem to be sort of lower risk because than we have been because of our levels of reserves, and lower risk even more because of our change in reserves because we've managed to contribute to them. I think that's really good news, but there's also a sort of a big word of warning there, in that a number of councils within London have leapfrogged us from here to here because of the financial pressures that they are under or have experienced, and they have had to very quickly draw significant amounts of money from their reserves in response to that volatility. So whilst I think we can pat ourselves on the back for improving financial resilience, this position doesn't still feel particularly safe. And as you see, whilst we're in this sort of higher up, we're in quite close with a number of other authorities. So that serves to continue to justify our position in our base budget of contributing to reserves. I think I'm almost done. This is just setting out our reserves. And again, it's just a reminder to you that sometimes these numbers look very big. Sometimes it looks like we've got reserves of 150 million, which we think would last us for years. In fact, some of these aren't ours. Some of these belong to schools. Some of them belong to our tenants through the housing revenue account. And there's very specific requirements around parking and public health. So when you take all of those aside, actually, we get left with sort of 37 million, which still sounds like a lot of money. But if you think that we've got the 20 million overspend in services this year, actually, with a significant volatility, that could last us between 12 to 24 months, I would say 18 months, in the event that we sort of had significant overspend. So an improving position, but still something we need to take a close view on. So just quickly, before any questions, an update on the final settlement. The budget was based on the provisional settlement. The final settlement was published just yesterday. There aren't any significant changes to the budget. We will update the budget paper for full council. There's a small increase in the homelessness prevention funding, but that's very specific and needs to be used towards homelessness. And there was a very big announcement on dedicated school grants deficits, where the government has said it will cover 90% of our high needs block deficit at the end of this financial year. Now, that's really good news, but it actually shouldn't affect our budget. We'll update the budget papers, but actually the high dedicated schools grant is a ring-fenced grant, and the statutory override that's in place that means that we don't fund that from the general fund will stay until the 31st of March 2028. So whilst really good news, it doesn't have any significant impact on our budget papers for next year. And finally, the settlement also published our public health grant allocations, which includes a small annual increase, which again is welcome. Whistle tops over the budget, which I'm happy to answer any questions on.
Thank you, Emily. Councillor Donnelly, did you want to add anything at this stage, or would you like to say something later?
Well, just very briefly, I'm aware that you have other business, so I'm going to try to operate a self-denying ordinance for my contributions. Really to emphasise what the very positive things. A lot's hard about the role that I'm lucky enough to be asked to do. One of the easier things about it in the last few years is that I could roll up to this and many other meetings and say, well, we can't call it a medium-term financial strategy because we don't know what's happening in the medium term. I don't have that easy get out anymore. We have visibility of our medium-term economic position, our revenues, an ability to map out our future much more clearly and further ahead. And for that, much thanks. You know, whatever else would have happened in this settlement, that alone would have been worth celebrating. But the very careful, I think, redistribution of money, in addition to a small overall increase to the money going to local government, but then a redistribution within it, which seems to be anything but random, has been thought through, is trying to correct a situation caused by sort of repeated inactivity in recent years, where governments have talked about intervening, rebalancing, creating a kind of new templates or new bases to go forward, and it has not happened. And we have absurd situations where the disparity in council tax payments between some affluent London boroughs and some of the poorest places in the country, whose council tax levels at Band D are 2 or 3 times what is paid in some parts of London. There's an attempt here, without tearing up the council tax structure or introducing a new arrangement, there's an attempt here to create a new balance in how council taxpayers, central government through revenue support grant, fund our services across the piece, the demand-led services, but also the universal services that, as Emily said, have undergone such a squeeze over the course of the last 10 to 15 years. And, you know, to be able to raise our heads, you know, look further ahead, have more optimism in how we can invest in those services, is a great opportunity for us and, you know, for our successors over the next few years.
Thank you, Councillor Donnelly. I agree. It is welcome and something we've been asking for a long time, so very welcome. I'm going to open it up for questions now for the committee. So Councillor Rice first, Councillor Conti, and then Councillor Moffat. And
Hi. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Emily and Steve, for that. Thank you. Because it is very welcome that the fact that we have got the government news come through about money coming through to help out councils with SEND. I mean, as a topic that I brought up last year, that was a very big on my mind. And so, of course, I just wonder if there's like new themes that are coming along and new things that we need to really address as well, and maybe get some extra help with. Because one theme that I did spot by looking through the papers was that the fact that we've got an ageing population seems to be actually influencing a lot of what's going on at the moment. I did notice there's one of the fun part is that you've got the adult operations, social care, older people and disabilities, and you can just see how high the amount of money we expect to be spending is just going up over those years, and it is quite stark and quite apparent. And there's also down a bit further on that list, you've got the treasury management, including the pension, and that's going up quite significantly as well. And I do wonder if that's really got a lot to do with the fact that we've got an ageing population, so we have more pensions to pay out for because a lot of our employees, I mean, maybe are moving on. And so I'm just wondering if that's got a lot to do with it as well. And the other thing that to me stands out when it comes to an ageing population is the council tax reduction scheme. And that means that if we've got a lot more older people, then we're going to just have to spend out on that as well and take that into account with the budget. So I'm just wondering really what kind of efforts we might be making in order to highlight such issues to government, in order to see what kind of special help that we could get in the future on that to address the issue of ageing population. And there's also just one other thing I did want to query as a proper question as well, was that on the reserves forecast, there's the COVID-19 grants reserve, and that seems to be continuing for some years into the future. So I'm just trying to get some understanding of why COVID-19 is still very much uppermost in our kind of mind and in our planning as far as 2030. Thank you.
Thank you. I thought we might have some go to other councillors first, but I think I've got enough there. Yeah, I think you're right. Certainly the send is very welcome. Actually, it was a significant national issue that was significantly undermining the financial resilience of a number of councils. So you're correct, that's welcome, and useful that you sort of pick up sort of what themes might there be for us to lobby government on, or to ensure that government understand some of the pressures that we're under. I think actually it's less the ageing population now. So you're quite right to pick up that line in terms of the increase. But actually what that increase that we're seeing in adult social care is now the working age population. So it's those people with learning disabilities and with mental health issues. So actually we're finding people, particularly with learning disabilities, are thankfully due to science now living longer with more complex needs, and we might have people which may have 3-to-1 care on a daily basis. So those costs are really high. I was actually at a panel this morning. Some of those costs of those placements could be £8,000 a week. And I think when people talk about adult social care, they still have in mind that ageing population. They still have in mind an increasing older people population where we may need to give home care or residential care. Actually, what's really causing our increases in cost, and which I don't believe is sort of on top of a government agenda at the moment, is that working age population, so learning difficulties and mental health. So you've picked the right area. I think it's a different theme. In terms of the Treasury management, again, that's less to do with the pensions, but more to do with the fact that we have been able to, through high interest rates and cash balances, gain more income. So as that income drops out, our net cost is going up. I'm trying to think what other themes I might pick out. I think certainly the probably temporary accommodation. We need to continue on homelessness. That is a significant national issue. I think we are, the sector is lobbying on that, but it's not felt so broadly across the population because it's more acute in cities and in London. So it's not quite the same as sort of send, which is being picked up everywhere. In relation to COVID-19, that's not a reserve held now for risk particularly. I think in terms of the COVID-19 risk, we would need to pick up new pandemic or other public health risks separately as and when, and that's what reserves more generally are for. That's particularly because there were a number of grants that we made to businesses, particularly during COVID-19, where payments were made out, where sometimes they were returned and other things. So that's holding those grant balances, which we may in due course have to repay to government or to places where sort of essentially they didn't take the money, maybe a cheque bounced and then they need to come back. So we're not accounting for any additional risks in COVID. What we're holding is a balance that we may need to repay at some point. So we're holding that just in case.
Thank you, Emily. And I have Councillor Conti, question next.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions. Obviously, it's really welcome, obviously, the additional funding, and I think it's different from the last 2 years of stuff when we've come to these meetings. A few questions. One, I was trying to jot down on your table, so I may have missed if it was on there. When you had the graph which showed what percentage each different pressure, so adult social care of the total funding, I think you said it was less than 25% was on universal services. What does that change after this with additional money going in? Where I couldn't see where it went after on the graph. So what percentage of the council budget will be spent on universal services next year and then at the end of the 3 years? My other question was around council tax. You spoke about obviously the link between core, or the assumptions made within core spending power with council tax. That doesn't mean though that we can't set a different rate of council tax, does it? It still means that the council still has the ability to do that. I just wonder whether obviously with the wider cost of living pressures, whether there was any thought about actually whether we needed to go to that 4.99% in order to help mitigate some of the other pressures that residents are facing at this time, given the increase in the funding that's coming. I had one other question, but it's escaped my mind. It might come back to me in a moment, but I'll come back if it.
Thank you. Yes, so we've tried to do that additional funding increase, and whilst we think it might increase slightly, even though we've put more money in, actually because of those increases still in the demand-led services. So until we've done our sort of estimates for next year on the detail, we don't know, but I don't actually expect it to increase significantly this year. I think it'll stop a decline because we're still putting more money into those demand-led services as well as those investments in. I think there may be, we've got to take a broader view now. We've got that medium-term settlement on where the other investment is going to go in future years. So I think it could change in the medium term, but I think for 26/7, the budget we're setting now, what with increase in demand-led services and even with that increase, I think it will stay about stable. Council tax CSP, yes. So you're absolutely right. The government makes an assumption that we will increase core spending power, and it will, but the referendum limits are limits. You're quite right. They're not sort of set. You can set numbers below. There's at least two reasons, and certainly as a Section 151 officer, I will always recommend the maximum increase, and that's because of that referendum limit. When you don't put a full increase in, you lose that forever. So we've done some calculations essentially that if the years that there were freezes in Ealing over those last, I don't know, it could be 13, 14, 15 years ago, 15 years. Had we increased to the maximum we'd have been able to, we would have £50 million more each year than we do today. So there's it's an exponential impact of not increasing council tax, because you're eroding your base essentially at that point. And I would have said before that you can never get it back. What we have found though, and this is the impact of government funding on a number of councils that Councillor Donnelly was referring to, is there are a number of councils with such low council tax that not this year, but next year and the year after, the government has removed the referendum limit for them, with an expectation they will significantly increase their council tax. And I'll say the other reason. So as well as the exponential point, when I talked about fair funding, I talked about first needs analysis and then resources analysis. So the government, when it does its grant funding calculation, says that's what you need, and now I'll take away what I think you can raise locally. When it does that calculation, it uses a calculation of the notional or an average level of council tax, which is £2,060, which is significantly more than Ealing's council tax. So what it's doing is it's reducing our funding, not by the amount we can actually raise, but by the amount it thinks we can raise. So it's got a detrimental impact on the way the government is going to give us funding. The further we are away from that notional level, the less funding we will get in relation to our need, because they'll say you could have raised that yourself. You didn't, but you could have, and so our funding level is reduced as a result. But yes, in theory, absolutely, there are at least two good reasons why, certainly as an officer, I would recommend that you don't. I do understand the point that you make on cost of living. I would say the council continues to have, you talked about the council tax reduction scheme. We pay 20 million for our working age council tax reduction scheme, because it is we continue to be able to provide 100% benefit to certain groups of people. It is true that that won't catch everybody, and one of the increases in the budget is to increase the council tax discretionary awards, so that we can take sort of discretionary approach to those who are struggling with their council tax.
Thank you. Is that your last question, or you remembered your third one? Go on quickly then.
It was in relation to Q3, and obviously that there was the £19 million that need to be found. And because I noted that this year you'd put, or over the next sort of over the medium term, the additional savings of 13.5 million in children and 3.4 million in adults. But for this quarter, I think it was saying, for example, in children's, that in the red, that unlikely to be achieved were like £4 million. So I was just wondering, given how difficult it is to find savings this year, and I don't know whether that you intend whether it's expected by the end of Q4 to those, what percentage that's going to be. But how are we going to find those additional savings? I'm guessing, essentially each year it's becoming harder and harder to find the savings within each of those directorates. So how are those two things balanced out?
Thank you. So yes, or particularly in children's this year, we have done a reset of the previous year's savings because, as you say, they haven't been delivered. Some of them will be delivered. Some of them were due to an expected staffing restructure, which is now being consulted on. So it's sort of a year late in coming through, but the principles of the saving will be made, but a year later. Some of them won't, and we've reset the children's budget. So essentially, we've added some of those undelivered savings in as growth to children's to account for the fact that it's not likely to achieve those. Having said that you're absolutely right. The savings are increasingly difficult to identify and manage, but we have got specific plans you can see in adults around their transformation programme, which includes a number of reviews. And the reason I know we've got an £8,000 a week case is I went to their high cost review panel this morning. So we do have some actions that we haven't sort of necessarily taken before that we're working towards. But you're absolutely right that there is risk there, particularly as demand grows. In children's, you may have seen as well, the government's hoping to sort of legislate against some profiteering essentially in the children's residential market, where again we'll be paying potentially £5,000 a week for a child's placement. So there may be some options as well through that regulation that might help us to manage those costs.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Moffat next.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'd like to start by commending Ms Hill and the rest of the team and their fantastic work in balancing the budget, and thank her for the presentation. Don't worry, Councillor Donnelly, thanking you as well. Councillor Donnelly, I wonder whether you would be able to describe what you think it is, the kind of policy platform that led us to face 14 years here for the council of kind of falling funding, and then conversely how you would describe the policy that's led to us now having more money to spend on healing services this year.
What did I say about self-denying ordinance? A tour de horizon. Well, I think it's well understood now whatever one imagines the theory of the coalition government's austerity platform to have been, it certainly involved in some respects taking money straight out of local government. In other respects, it involved moving services out of central government and into local government, and not in every case transferring the money that had gone with them. So the strain came in a couple of ways: extra work with less money, and at a point where incomes began to flatline, and then councils, for very worthy reasons, including our own in both parties, over the course of a transition, did this in freezing council tax. But I think had everybody realised how long it was going to go on for, a different approach would probably have been taken. I think for much of the 2010s, people had an optimistic view that somehow austerity was going to end, and it didn't. And I think also, I think the other thing, and this is in the latter part of the last government's under various prime ministers, I think grip began to be lost. So I think there were ministers in previous governments who I think had the right idea in terms of wanting to reset, realign. I might not have agreed necessarily with their model, but they understood the need to provide a new model and a medium-term thinking, but they never had the grip at the central government to be able to deliver it. So I think we all understand the challenges that would be involved in simply replacing council tax with something else. We know how exciting the country was for a period of a year or so when the rates disappeared and the late unlamented community charge poll tax was then replaced by the council tax, because once you're into a world of winners and losers, it's very difficult to well, I always think that the winners are grateful for a short period of time and the losers remember until the end of recorded time. And I think particularly in the kind of febrile environment of politics in the country at the moment, I don't think it would be a wise thing to do to try to simply replace one form of local government taxation with another. That's why I think what they've done is quite clever. I think it's to say, okay, let's try then to recalibrate, to create a kind of norm of what we might think council tax should be around the country for a bandy taxpayer. And that will involve a kind of readjustment over time in some councils who are under, and they'll have to make adjustments. We're under no obligation to go higher than 5%, so we'll operate within the parameters that we're given. But there are councils who've been operating historically on very, very low levels of council tax based on the fact that 30 odd years ago, the balance of pressures on them meant that they could deliver certain services more cheaply, or they could outsource all of their services. But all of those councils are now making the same demands regarding demand-led services in adults and children's and homelessness, and then they're looking for money for government without, as it were, anteing up their share. And I think the message behind the fair funding agreement, fair funding policy, is to say there's a fair share now, and we can calculate this fair share around core spending power, around a normalisation of an expected council tax level, and we'll fund the rest. I can think back a kind of generation to when government calculated a standard spending assessment on adults and children's social care, and expected the deal at that point was that we would match fund what they calculated at an agreed level. And then kind of your council tax increase came out of that. How much you raised council tax by was determined in a sense by the calculation of how much money you needed. And we've gone through a long period of council tax, high council tax rises being non-existent. You know, if you go back when I was first a councillor, 5% council tax rise wouldn't have been thought particularly much at all. But in very low periods of inflation, strict regulation on what could happen to council tax, everything began to flatline. So I think these are the first steps on trying to rebalance, to make and it's fair in name and fair in nature, I think. And we won't get everything we ever want out of it, and certainly not everything we ever want in the immediate term. But I think it's a fairer system for local government as a whole. I hope that brief explanation answers your question.
Thank you, Councillor Donnelly. Councillor Ball next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you to Emily and your team for all the work that's gone into the budget and also for your clear explanation of it. I'd like to ask about savings. So, yeah, you pointed out that they're mainly ones approved in previous years, but looking at the largest area in the savings table in Appendix 2, children's commissioning and management services, and then there's a line on reprofiling above. So presumably somewhere in there that includes the children's centres. So although the savings are being reprofiled, there is still a saving in future years versus this year, isn't there? So is it correct to say that the budget does include significant spending cuts compared to the status quo of this year?
In terms of cuts, no, I don't think so. So the vast majority of so you're right when you look at savings, you've sort of got 6 million in of children's. If you look at the growth in children's, it's 12. So you've still got a net increase of 6 million in children's. I think that's right. I'm just checking. Well, in fact, you've got gross increase because of some additional grants, actually, sorry, a net increase of 10 million in children's next year. So children's savings from the previous years, you are correct to say the early help savings were in there, although that was 24, 25 and 25, 26. So there was never anything in 26, 27 onwards for that. The savings in children's therefore relate largely to staffing restructures and works on those really expensive placements that we talked about. So the commissioning of placements, particularly increasing foster care, which has better outcomes for children and young people than placing them in residential care as well. So the vast majority of savings in children's are both on placements and on staffing. In terms of the others, adult social care savings, so they're mainly in, just trying to get the right slide up, adults and housing. So the 3 demand-led services who need the most money also need to make the most savings because that amount of money isn't available in the other budgets. So the adult social care savings were that review programme that I was talking about, which actually isn't cuts to services, but specific reviews of placements and their needs. And housing and environment are, again, not cuts, but looking at ways to reduce the cost of our temporary accommodation. So I wouldn't identify any of the 26-27 savings as cuts more than sort of management of costs and demand.
Thank you, Emily. I've got Councillor Wall next. Oh.
And it's probably worth saying that prior to us understanding what was in fair funding for us, I mean, we travelled in hope, but we planned obviously on the basis of as was, and we had already the shape of a budget without fair funding changes, which would not have involved the kind of cuts that Emily's referred to. So it was a tougher gig. It didn't have the kind of additional investments we've been able to make, but it would in any event, because of the hard work we'd done in previous years, it would have enabled us to deliver a balanced budget again, another balanced budget again without dipping into reserves, but without making cuts to frontline services.
Thank you, Councillor Donnelly. Councillor Wall.
Thank you. Yeah, I share, congratulations, Emily, Steve, and the team behind you. And it's not just this year, it's leading to this year, because now we've got a grown-up government that will understand local government rather than try and crucify local government. But it's good to be in a place where we may even have debates about where we spend money in universal services, which up till few months ago, we weren't even getting close to that. So, but my question is about pressures on services. The budget talks about that all the way through. I mean, it is still telling us we've got lots of pressures, both in growth and in other sectors. But I'm just wondering, what this committee can do in terms of helping along that journey of getting to the place we really want to be in terms of finding those savings in the future. I know there's a board, and I know there's a subset of the cabinet in the board, etc. I'm just wondering how that links in with scrutiny going forward, and where scrutiny can come in to that. That's my question.
Thank you. Thank you for the offer. We need all the brains on this that we can get. Where can scrutiny best help? So I think generally in those demand-led services, we have scrutiny committees that pick up those adult social care, children's social care, and TA. So I think probably the sort of more detailed work on those is best done within those sort of scrutiny, to understand the demand, to understand, as Councillor Rice said, some of the themes coming through. What do we do about these increases in costs in LD? So I think in terms of sort of overview and scrutiny, we've started, and there's a line in here talking about these corporately led efficiency savings, or what we're calling corporate programmes. And we're looking to sort of develop that programme. This is the first year that we've identified a number of sort of efficiency savings this year, but actually we're looking to sort of expand that. And as we now have medium-term settlement, look for medium-term savings. And particularly at the last committee, we took an item on ICT and digital and ICT. And I think there is potentially significant opportunity still there in that, and also in some of our work on workforce and contracts. And those seems to me would be a really good area for the Overview and Scrutiny Committee to pick up. So potentially something to look at, sort of how we developing that corporate programme, and particularly some of those sort of more corporately led sort of themes in digital and tech and other things, and that would seem to sort of align with some of the other items that you take here. And you'll have heard, I think, Pete, when he came to talk to you about digital, I think he used the term sort of cautiously optimistic, because we think there's opportunity there, yet we must, continue to be careful in sort of use of AI and data as well. So I think as we develop those, it would be useful for scrutiny to sort of help us say, yes, but be cautious, or yes, push that harder. And that might be a good area to keep coming back here.
Thank you. On that note, Emily, like delivering the savings, just how aspirational or reasonable are we about delivering them? Is it possible that OSC could track those? Because I know you've created 2 boards, haven't you, to track the transformation programmes and the MTFS board, and they'll be reporting quarterly, I think, to Cabinet. But could we have some updates, just keeping track of the savings? Are they on target? Maybe RAG rated, that sort of thing. Would that be possible?
I think that would be an excellent idea. And as Councillor Conti sort of already noted, this year we haven't delivered a number of our savings, and we need, to make the most of the additional government funding and the choices that the council wants to make in how it invests that. It needs to manage its budget, otherwise it gets swallowed up by overspends and non-delivery of savings. So yes, you're quite right. We've created 2 new boards, particularly the MTFS board will be tracking the delivery of those savings. So we are setting up a new reporting mechanism ourselves with clear business cases, clear milestones, and then reporting through that board by exception. So we could certainly bring, I don't know, so the first quarter of that also here, so that you can have that oversight that we've got internally, and provide us challenge and and suggestions even on that too. So I think that'd be a really good idea. I should have said it, but you've thought of it after me.
Thanks, Emily. I've got one last question, I think, from Councillor Mohammed. I don't see any more hands.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, Emily. It's very detailed and comprehensive and really to the point. It's very much welcomed. I particularly was interested to learn about the relative need, which is exactly what Ealing needs to be assessed by population and deprivation. I have one question, you'd be pleased to know, and this is about the grants that you mentioned that the government now is all combined into one lump sum. In terms of the previous grants, which was specific for a specific area, does that structure still applies, or is this just a combined and the organisation can use as they see as a priority or area of need?
Thank you. That's actually quite a more difficult question than you might think, actually. So yes, through the relative needs assessment, the government has combined all of those different grants and now has put what we would have done on a line-by-line basis, put it into RSG, so Revenue Support Grant. It has consolidated, and to a major extent, or at least to an extent, it provides us then the freedom to decide locally how you spend the increased resources. However, a number of those funding sources also come from Department of Health. So a lot of our social care funding has sort of originated from Department of Health. The government is quite clear that there is not a separate grant allocation. It has, however, set the expectation that it doesn't expect social care funding to fall, and in fact it expects it to increase in line with sort of overall increases in funding. So whilst it does provide more flexibility, particularly in adult social care, I think because of the funding source, it will still monitor us on the level of expenditure. And if it sees and doesn't understand why we might decrease more than others, it's likely to come and talk to us. Now, there may be very legitimate reasons. We've talked about the sort of review programme that we've got done and are undertaking, and in those circumstances we would make the case when they come to talk to us. But so yes, it now becomes unring-fenced, but particularly in social care there is an expectation that we sort of hold the funding, and the increases that the government has made in respect to social care it would expect to see through our budgets. I don't think there's too much of a risk in that. Just the nature of adult social care and demand will mean that our budgets are likely to increase anyway in line with the expectations. So yes, so it's not quite as unring-fenced and consolidated as it might first seem, which is probably why you have the question.
Thank you, Emily. Just one related question on my previous one, on the capital growth schemes as well, where it lists the items and then lists how they're going to be funded, Section 106 grant or revenue. It doesn't say anything about whether we've actually secured those monies or we anticipate. So would it be possible to improve it in the future by maybe rag rating the funding as well for the capital?
We could do that, only that in any cases where we've put funding, we have already secured it in order to put it in the budget. So if you were to look at a pipeline of schemes which aren't yet in the budget, they would have, as you say, things where we might expect funding to come in, but we're not quite sure. It's only at that point that we would put them in the budget. So the lines that you see before you have already been through that process, but there are other things that may be in development that we're still trying to secure that funding for.
Thanks, Emily. I don't see any more questions. Does anyone have any specific recommendations? I think I captured two. The OSE looks at how we develop the corporate programme and the corporate-led themes, including digital and technology, and also that in relation to the savings that they're brought here, as well as the extra boards, and rag rated as far as possible. Okay, anything else from anybody? No? Well, thank you very much, Emily. Thank you very much, Steve, and congratulations. It is a relief to have a balanced budget and not to be in the position of some of our neighbours. So yeah, just well done, and to have the government we've got now. Thank you very much. So I'll now move on to item 6, which is the council looking at its first council-owned company, which is Greener Ealing Limited. And I'll invite, we have 2 members from Greener Ealing, Katerina, who's the managing director of GEL, and Mike, who's the chair of GEL, as well as our strategic director of housing and environment, Nikki, and our cabinet member for climate action, Paul Driscoll, and our assistant director of environment and community protection, Joe. So who would like to, Joe, will you begin? Thank you.
Okay, right, thanks. Good evening. I haven't prepared a presentation for this item just because the report is fairly straight to the point. I will briefly just summarise its contents, which should only take a minute. So the report is provided to the committee to enable you to take a strategic view of Greener Ealing Limited, or GEL. This is the council's wholly owned company, which was established to deliver core environmental services. GEL commenced its operations in 2020, so it's probably is a good juncture to consider if the model's delivered and whether it remains the right strategic vehicle for the future of the delivery of these sorts of services. Within the report, we've outlined the background and the establishment of GEL, the governance arrangements, how that is led by the council shareholder committee, and talked a bit about contract and performance management. Further detail about GEL itself is provided in the appendix, which is GEL's annual report and financial statement, which was for last financial year 24 to 25. Within the report, we've done a fairly fundamental value for money assessment. That was provides basically a benchmark on performance compared to London peers across waste, street cleansing and park services. The report also outlines some of the social value and other benefits of the company around terms and conditions, the fact that a large proportion of GEL's employees live locally, and the company's commitment to things like London living wage and job security and so on. Finally, the report outlines some of the future challenges and the opportunities as we've described them, but with the panel in front of us, we're really happy to take questions about a variety of things. As you can see, the report has essentially tried to cover the whole range of different things you might want to consider. So yeah, happy to take questions.
Thank you, Joe. So I'll open up to the committee for questions. Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Chair. So just a couple of points on there. That on page 14, there's the performance indicator table, and it mentions about the number of complaints. So I've just the number of complaints does actually seem very small, and so I'm just wondering, is that kind of any does that cover like any kind of complaint that someone might have, or is there like a particular definition of the complaint in terms of it's something far more serious that's being recorded, just so I can understand just the level of complaints that we are receiving. So that would be, yeah, so that'd be on page 14 of the report there, table 1. And also just as one other point here about I'm interested in the simpler recycling and the fact that there will be some outlay that we have to think about in terms of changing the systems and what we actually use in order to deal with our recycling. And I'm just wondering really just how much do we know already about what we're going to need to do in terms of buying new equipment or actually changing the waste stream, as it were, for that. I asked because I'm just quite alarmed actually, because I heard about somewhere in Essex where their bins that they have stickers on there which have like expiry dates on, so when they come and take your rubbish or whatever it is away, and if the stickers states the expiry date, they will actually take the whole bin away. And so you actually lose that. And so there are things that are going on out there which alarm me. So I'm just wondering just how much do we know already about what we're going to have to take into consideration and what surprises there might be ahead. Thank you.
So if I may comment on the number of complaints, so this is the average number of complaints per month we have received since taking over the contract. You are right. The number of complaints before Gel took over was in 4-digit numbers. We were talking about 3,000 to 4,000 complaints per month on average. With Gel taking over, the process was slow, but we came to the point when the number of complaints significantly reduced to double-digit numbers, as you can see per report. If I may comment on the Simply Recycling as well. So we have established project board earlier last year, I think, and we have got regular meeting and updates looking at the way of improvement, regulatory changes, looking at the fleet optimization, requirements as well. So we are working closely with our council's colleague on this and trying to get ahead of any changes.
I think I'll just add with Simple Recycling. So yeah, we've established a waste project board. So that's both with Gel and also West London Waste Authority, who's our strategic partner for disposal. And I think in the context of this report and a local authority owned company, as opposed to maybe a more commercial arrangement, is that we can have quite kind of honest early conversations around optimization and explore quite openly the possible consequences of simple recycling and different waste streams and so on, whether it's containers, routes, etc., without necessarily being exposed to the more kind of commercial elements of how that conversation might occur with a company that isn't owned by the local authority. But yeah, I could talk for a long while about simpler recycling and the possible ways we might go. But I think for what's being scrutinised tonight, the fact that Gel is local authority owned is a really big benefit to us in those kind of exploratory conversations, because the future is uncertain. It's not just simpler recycling. We've got things like the emissions trading scheme coming up, possible deposit schemes, but it's that relationship provides a resilience which is actually really difficult to put into a report, into kind of tangible or put a value on it, is what I'm trying to say. Okay.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Wall next.
Sorry. One specific question, and I probably know the answer, but I'm just going to ask it anyway. On that same table 1, it says right first time. It says 100%. Does that mean every single one, every bin has been picked up? Or what does that mean, right first time? But that's a specific question. The bigger question is, you talk about growth for Gel, and I'm just wondering where you're looking at growth for Gel going forward. Is it taking over more services, or is it expanding the services that you've got already, so like the vehicles, etc.? Or I know that you've got Gunnersbury Park contract now. Are you looking further outside the borough, or are you looking at both really? But yeah, the specific one just bugging me, that's all.
Okay, so to the first question of 100%, it might be a little bit misleading because it might be 99.8% or 99.7%, but rather than having the decimal places, it's just showing as 100% on average. So you will have some miscollection, which is going to reflect in the number, but overall, on average, you are looking at around 100%.
Did you want to talk about growth as well? Thank
you. You're absolutely right. Since coming operational back in 2020, we have taken additional contracts from the council, like a parking enforcement back in April 2024. Also, we have taken in-house fleet maintenance contract because the previous contractor went into administration around the same month, April 2024. We have secured some commercial contract with Gunnersbury Park, and we have also secured some smaller fleet maintenance contract with other boroughs, not the big ones, small to medium size. we are looking to grow because we can see the potential. We have got the knowledge, we have got the experience. So it's something we would like to, expand further, because we need to make sure the business is resilient to any changes, whether it's financial market changes or operational changes. So we are open to the new challenges, new contractual commercial contracts, and whether it's within from the Ealing Council or any external parties, we are open to it.
I suppose would add as well, the kind of rhythm of over time is that at the moment GEL are establishing their business plan for the next financial year, and then once that's agreed, that will come to shareholder committee here, so the subcommittee of cabinet for decision as representative of the owner. So some of those kind of growth decisions or directions comes via the shareholder committee as the owner, and that will form part of the business plan. So some of those bigger questions about would GEL operate outside of Ealing, what other areas of commercial areas might it go to, that ultimately the council holds the decision making on that as well. It would be put forward by Katie and Mike, but it would be ultimately decided by the council.
Can I just ask on that, do you kind of regard that as necessary to build resilience, or do you regard you're safe at the level that you're at?
So it's something which is just exploring further, if there is a knowledge and experience, why not to take it? Because that's helping eventually back to the money can be reinvested back to the borough. So we can see the services, the efficiencies, everything has been delivered, but there is more demand on the services going forward. The council is facing gaps, financial gaps as well. So it's just as an independent LATCO company helping to bring the revenue back to the council.
Thank you.
If I can just add one thing to that as well, I think it's not just about financial resilience either. I think in terms of creating a management team to manage the services, if you're looking for an organisation that's just going to run existing services and every year there'll be a few cuts and running a little bit less, you need a different team than one that is looking to grow. And I think we're keen to build a management team here that's forward thinking, wants to grow and expand their horizons. And I think controlled growth in a sensible way is part of that. Is part of that process. So I think it's management team and workforce confidence, resilience as well.
So I have Councillor Conti next.
Thank you. I had 3 questions. One was on the key performance indicators. On fly tips, there was quite a big reduction. So the target's 95% and it had been sort of between 95, 98, then it drops to 91, and last year it was 78%. So I was just wondering what the reason behind that was and what steps have been taken to try and address that. The second point was on parks and open spaces. Ealing had the lowest spend per head of any borough in London by quite some significant margin away from the average. I was wondering what the reason for that is. Obviously, there's a sweet spot by not paying too much, but are we not getting enough in that area given that we're spending so little, and what the reason behind that was? And I guess the third thing was really just on street sweeping. We're almost, I think, roughly sort of in the top third in terms of spend per head. I think probably most people would acknowledge that there's still streets with leaves from this winter that's turned to mush, etc. And I know you've had 4 complaints in the last year, but I would say I've had more than 4 complaints just from my ward this winter in terms of the street sweeping situation. So I just wonder what more within that area and street sweeping in particular that we can get more value for money. So, in terms of the offer that's being given how much we're spending per head in comparison to other boroughs.
Okay, in regard to the fly tips, we have seen a significant increase in the fly tips across the borough. There are a number of factors contributed to that, whether it's increased number of the residents, limitation of the HWRC sites. We have deployed extra teams in to manage it, but we feel like there might be other improvement which needs to be maybe like changes in the policies of the council, enforcement and stuff like that, which can help towards reducing the number of the fly tips across the borough. but we have seen a significant increase in the across the borough.
Thank you. And I think that's a national picture as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not just the borough.
Yeah, I can add on some fly tips as well. I mean, nationally, there's an increase in fly tipping across whether in an urban area, whether in metropolitan area, whether in rural areas, there's a definite national trend on increase. And the number of actions taken through education, through increasing fines, through enforcement, and it needs to be recognised that although enforcement comes through the council functions, council services and street services, we have traditionally had a very strong and continue to have a very strong performance in enforcement, both across London as a comparator and nationally. I think when I looked at last DEFRA national statistics, it went something like London, the south of England, Ealing Council, and then it went further down like the northwest of England, West Midlands. So in terms of enforcement, the council does a huge amount of work. Never mind deploying resources, both collection and enforcement working in tandem, work with businesses, and I could go on to around about 15 different actions that are all happening. And the amount of reporting for fly tips is actually reducing consistently. There's a downward trend on that. So that's happened since about October and continue to go on a downward trend. It wouldn't have come through in these statistics as they are now, but I think there's a high performance and really a concerted effort both by GEL and by council officers in addressing a real issue for the whole borough, but a very sustained effort there. So we've got a good news story there about sustained effort, downward trend in reporting of fly tippings, not because we're not promoting that, but because there's probably a real impact on a wide range of measures that are happening. So I'll address the fly tipping. I'll leave Joe to do some other.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I feel I'm going to dance over the streets question because I forgot what you asked, but let me just go quickly to the parks. So yeah, that value for money assessment is effectively pounds per head spent on that area of work. Now, I don't want to lead the committee to a recommendation, but we're a significant outlier in that chart. There's a couple of reasons behind it. One is because of where we get the data from other boroughs. It's done via financial statutory returns. There is a name for it that I've forgotten, but Emily's left, so that's fine. But different boroughs categorize things slightly differently. So I think there is work that we probably do around parks and there's probably included in there things like grounds maintenance that we might report down the street cleansing or indeed the waste line that isn't going in parks that other boroughs do. So if there was a recommendation that a more detailed value for money assessment that's maybe also linked to on-street performance, so actual impactful performance, not just because this report very much focuses on pounds per head type performance values, as opposed we have got some of the metrics in here, but is there further we could do for comparisons? I would welcome that. The streets question, I apologise, I lost the thread on what the question was.
Just essentially, we're in the top third of spend per head. Are we confident we're getting value for money? Because essentially the frequency of deep cleans is once every, is it 12 weeks? In terms of how, in terms of the leaf sweep up this winter, given there's still roads with leaves that haven't been swept and we're in February, given that we're spending, in the top third of London, do we think in comparison to those other boroughs, are we getting value for money?
I mean, I would say yes, but I feel like I'm in a position if I would say that, wouldn't I? Well, this may lead to a recommendation in terms of, as I say, we've done a pounds per head demonstration of that kind of value. But you're right. What does that translate to on the street? Are we the third best in terms of performance, or the third worst, I suppose, in terms of performance, if you think it's directly proportional relationship? So I might welcome that because I haven't put that in the report.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Moffat next.
Actually, it's all already been covered. So
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Meady after.
Thank you, Chair. You've kind of touched up on this already, but in terms of the complaints and how it's gone down to single digits now, I just wanted to dive a little bit deeper into this to just understand what what have we done to make it into those single digits? So what was the learning that we took away, and then what we've implemented, I guess?
So I think we have gone through the workforce cultural changes as well, and way of thinking how the workforce were thinking prior to GEL taking over. We have introduced improvements such as see it and clear it policy, rather than only taking the rubbish when they are presenting on the roads. We have gone extra mile just to make sure that the complaints are reduced. We have looked at the best way how to train the drivers, making sure that we retain the drivers so they know the roads. We don't have so many miscollection. It's that kind of improvements program we have put through. We are still improving it. It's not perfect, but it's a continuous process.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Anand after.
Thank you. Great to see that we are still like second behind Bromley, and also that on table 1, our cost per head is also quite low. We're doing quite well, and personally I also see the performance of Greener Ealing in collection of bins. They actually come into the gardens now and actually take the bins, so the performance is all great. Where I just need a little bit of clarification, although it's been touched by Councillor Conti and Joe, you've also touched that, is about the cleaning per head. Looking at the table, we've got the highest per population cost compared to the rest of our neighbouring boroughs in West London. What's the reason? Is that correlated to fly tipping, that we're having to clean more on the streets, is costing us more, or what's the correlation that can bring the driver to bring that down? What's the main driver that can be attacked to bring that cost down? Thank you.
It's a difficult one for us to give an answer to that, in terms of we can only judge from GEL's point of view in terms of our efficiency and the way we operate. From a personal point of view, I mean, I've been in this sector for 50 years now. Unbelievable, but it's true. Working across local government and private sector. So I personally have been involved in 12 out of the 32 London Borough contracts in my career. So I think the first thing we did when I've been involved with as chair of GEL from the beginning, so I can't sort of blame anybody else in terms of history. But certainly what we did is look at clear benchmarking in terms of looking at the borough, looking at the sort of productivity levels, the levels of the methodology. So we did a thorough review to make sure that we as GEL were operating in a very efficient way. What's difficult to know is comparing it to some of the other London boroughs. I mean, we're looking at moving into sort of some of the inner London boroughs, Westminster, Kensington, Chelsea, that I'm aware of. There they are working a 24-hour, totally different operation. So I'm confident at the time that we did the benchmarking that we were very, very confident that the productivity levels, the methodology we were deploying was, certainly in line with those. It's difficult to know where the cost base is. Clearly, we're proud of the fact that we're operating London Living Wage. That does increase the cost base significantly. I know from a lot of the private sector contracts that are delivering these services certainly do not go anywhere near a London Living Wage. So there are a number of drivers there that are impacting that, but we do believe that with the London Living Wage you get a better quality workforce, a more committed workforce, and that does show on the service on the ground, but potentially it could be a bit more expensive.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Anand. I had Councillor Anand. Sorry, Councillor Gordon, and then Councillor Mohammed, and then Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I want to talk about parking, and just one thing is on the table 1, which everyone's asking about. The first 2 parking enforcement statistics are over 100%. So if you could explain to me what that means, I don't quite understand it. But also, furthermore, obviously, parking's come under GEL nearly 2 years ago now, not without difficulty at the beginning in terms of bringing the staff over. Can we talk? And there's nothing in the report about the financial side or the value for money aspect, which we've been focusing in different areas. I don't need all the numbers, the statistics, but could you talk to that a little bit? From my view, and I think from a lot of colleagues here, it feels like a huge success. We are seeing parking enforcement across the borough in a much more rigorous way than we did before, where it's frankly it felt like it was concentrated around central Ealing. But financially, in terms of the broader terms, if you could talk to that a little bit. Thank you.
So you're right, parking enforcement came to Green Ealing almost 2 years ago, April 2024. In terms of the deployment hours and the percentage, we are achieving more than 100% because we are deploying more staff on the street than originally planned and projected. So that's why the number is over 100%. In terms of the success story, I believe it was a good success story seeing the numbers and the compliance prior to April 2024 and what we are seeing now. We have seen a complete workforce culture change. You know, we have changed the terms and condition, improved their terms and condition overall. So all of that contributed to the success of this contract, the way it's going. And I'm sorry, I forgot the second question.
Well, it was just really the value for money side of it. You know, again, it's hard to always measure these things because there's been a real cultural change and we're doing different things than we were 2 or 3 years ago. But how just if you could talk to it, I don't know, you say, are we doing well there? Could we improve? How can we measure this?
Okay, so just in terms of parking, obviously we, through the contract, will pay GEL to do the deployment of the parking enforcement, but the actual income comes into the council separately into the parking account. You'll notice, and it's no coincidence, at the time at which GEL picked up carrying out the parking enforcement for us, our income has steadily increased, and that is partly attributable to the excellent performance and the increased resource that GEL have put onto the streets, which you've obviously acknowledged and seen, but it's also coupled with other wider parking sort of contravention enforcement that we've done around increasing yellow box junctions, improving safety around school streets, looking at, you know, our fees and charges and benchmarking those across London as well. So there's been quite a lot of change in parking in the last couple of years, and that has improved the financial position in the parking account from that you'll see through the budget reports.
Thank you. Councillor Mohammed.
Thank you, Chair. I have quite a few questions. The first one is about the breakdown of gender of the workforce. I noticed the female workforce has gone from 7 to 8%. What other measures or initiative are you planning to accelerate progress and improve in operational level? My other question is about CO2 reduction. 8% reduction, it says in the report, was achieved in the roadmap to support Ealing. In 2030 carbon neutral goal, are there any specific targets to achieve that? And last question, well, actually, it's not last question. Technology, beyond EV transition, what investment are planned in digital system, automation or AI? And my last question, you'd be pleased to know, is nearly all your revenue comes from Ealing Council. What's been done to diversify the client base or develop new revenue? I think the chair touched on briefly to reduce dependency and ensure long-term viability. Thank you.
So let me just start with the first question in terms of the female workforce and the percentage increases. We are actively encouraging the females to join the workforce. We have seen 2 new drivers joining as HGV drivers in the last couple of months. In the last month, we have also established a female work group to discuss, you know, the improvements and attract more people in. We have created a part-time position for the females, you know, when they have to look after, have got personal commitment as well. So we have created part-time positions for them to join us on the separate or different levels. So it's not only the corporate services female, it's also the actual operational side of the female, which we are trying to encourage actively. And we have seen the increases and providing any necessary support we can. In terms of the CO2 reduction, so we have started looking at the simple stuff like idling time of the vehicles, encouraging the drivers to make sure they are aware how can they contribute to the overall CO2 reduction, specific training, changes of the mind, how individuals can contribute towards the target. We are working closely with the Ealing Council on the climate and environmental objectives. One of the things we are looking at the EV transition of our vehicles to the EV options. There are some challenges which we are facing, but we are exploring other options such as hydrotreated vegetable oil, a replacement of the diesel, which we can see a significant reduction in the CO2 as well. It's something we want to support with the data and present back to the council colleagues. So we have got some data and statistic behind that. And in terms of the revenue from the Ealing Council, you are right. The significant portion of the Green Ealing revenue comes from the Ealing Council. With the commercial contracts such as Gunnersbury Park, we are trying to diversify the revenue, making sure we have got some other income coming through. But as a wholly owned council subsidiary, we have got only limited option the way we can look for the new commercial income.
I think there was a question about AI and innovation.
Okay. In terms of the AI and innovation, so Ealing Council ICT is fully outsourced to, Green Ealing ICT is fully outsourced to Ealing Council. So we have got a regular meeting, and any update, whatever the Ealing Council is introducing, we are trying to get on the same board. We are trying to invest in the new innovative ways, using the software system, looking at the benchmarking of the services, looking at the cost analysis and so on, but it's limited because we are wholly owned by the Ealing Council, and the ICT is wholly supported by Ealing Council.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Ball and then Councillor Johnson after Councillor Ball.
Yeah, thank you. I know we're meant to be concentrating on the strategic role of the LATCO, but the stats we've been given are fascinating, and I'm afraid I would like to follow up on some of those points. The sort of 99.9% collection rate. I mean, that doesn't reflect what we see as councillors. The numbers in here, there would be like 53 missed refuse collections in a year. That's less than one missed collection per councillor. I mean, that can't be the case. I mean, certainly, I think it's better than it used to be with the external contractor. Absolutely, it's a pretty good service, but there's something going wrong with those numbers. I wonder if it is. I mean, I guess part of it may be simply that the reports of miscollections are recorded, and it's actually a street's been missed, so it counts as one report rather than 100. That may be what's happening. I don't know, but anyway, just if you can comment on that, because there does seem to be something going wrong with the data there. And then the other thing, we talked about various things in terms of the sort of pounds per head versus actual performance. I mean, as others have said, the street sweeping is a problem that residents perceive the streets as being noticeably worse than a lot of other boroughs. So it is the point that I think it was Councillor Conti made, that we're in the kind of top third of expenditure on street sweeping, but the performance isn't matching that. And the parks figure, that's incredible. That we're the lowest spend on parks by quite a long way. So either that means we're amazingly efficient at the parks work, or else it means that we're not doing enough in parks. And again, I mean, Joe offered to come back with some work on that. I think certainly we need to look into that, because that does seem to be that there's something awry with the stats. And then just zooming out, so changing the subject, so zooming out to the group growth point we have talked about. I mean, clearly it's really good to diversify by things like Gunnersbury Park and so on. But is there serious consideration about taking on a whole borough-wide contract somewhere else? With all the risk that entails, is that something which is potentially in the roadmap, or would it be more about much smaller, discrete opportunities to diversify?
I think I can feel the palpable sense that people want to respond. So, Kate, I don't know if did you want to start with some of the data points and then we move around.
I think just to remind, the numbers represent the average monthly figure. It's not the total for the year, it's the average monthly figure in that year.
It's also the rectify, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just the other point on that is that these are unrectified miscollections. So, I mean, you, for instance, you will get a note if you miss a bin in the morning, someone reports that in, we will then go back during that day and recollect that. So these are ones that have failed that contractual test as well. So these are ones that weren't collected on the same day.
The rectification ones line at the top rather than the ones below.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So the ones that do have these double-digit numbers, they are for they're supposed to be for total missed. So in table 1, so the top line is talking about missed rectifications, but then below the bold bit, the lines per type of collection, that they are they're the basic missed rather than the missed rectification, aren't they?
Yeah,
Yeah.
monthly averages.
I think as well, just for context, that like they are per 100,000 as well, those figures, just because we do obviously FOI requests wise. I know that I think on a given week, I think we do something like 285,000 missed collections, and our missed rate is 99 point something%. But obviously that's a few hundred, or well, that's between 50 and 100 missed collections per week.
I'm glad we've sorted out it's an average monthly misconnections, but if you're talking about 50-ish or thereabouts monthly miscollections per 100,000, I mean, we can appreciate, I think everybody can appreciate the percentage of that is way less than 1%, probably 0.1%. And if anybody wants to cast back to the days of Amy, for those who were in the council at that point, the light and day contrast is just remarkable, and to try and pretend it's anything but light and day between what we have now and what we used to have is just not recognising the reality. All the good work that is done through GEL, retaining staff, improving training, and there was a definite political decision that we pay people better, we get better management, and people should be, and everybody on the committee should realise that a lot of the staff tupied over. A lot of the staff are the same, but the way they're paid, the way they're treated, the working conditions, the training and support that's given has given a light and day change, and we should recognise that and thank GEL for bringing that in, and the management that's have allowed that to come through. In terms of street cleanliness, I mean, I'm sure Councillor Conte will appreciate Hanger Hill is getting its deep clean this week. So between Monday and Friday, you'll probably have a massive notice of a difference there. So that's happening this week. And parks, and as it was said by officers here, that comparing costs and between councils is quite a tricky issue. If you're not comparing absolute likes with likes, you can get disparities, and that will probably take quite a bit of ironing out to understand that we are generally comparing like with like. We have an issue with Bromley because we think we're not comparing like with like, and we probably think we are the top in London for recycling, but they have a slightly different way of how they do their recycling. We have a little niggle with Bromley about that. So and in terms of expansion and growth, I think it's something that GEL should be looking at, because that will actually, in terms of their fixed cost base, would allow that to be sort of dissipated over a wider income base. However, we'll always do it with care, with consideration, and know where home is. The growth of GEL has been organic, step by step, and when it's been comfortable and secure to do that, and we'll always have that in mind, and it will go to the shareholder board to look at those leaps in strategic change, and it'll be at an appropriate time, in an appropriate way, and all that will be taken into consideration. So it will be done very carefully, but it's something that we should be mindful that it's actually good to consider that and have an outward-looking organisation.
Thank you. And I certainly remember what it was like under Enterprise and Amy, and I vastly see the improvements. And yesterday when we were out door knocking, we had one resident actually saying how good Gel were, how nice the staff were, and how they went the extra mile, and she noticed it. So thank you. And I've got Councillor Johnson next.
I'll be quick because I know we've had a long session. The earlier report, the budget report, mentioned 4 areas for investment, and cleaner streets was one of them. So I just wondered, have you got any ideas about what you'd like to do, or have you not decided yet? And I think you're doing a good job.
So at the moment, what from the lines in the budget report, and apologies, I'll have to take this from memory, but there's a couple of things in there in relation to streets and waste that Gel will be helping us to deliver. So one of them is a neighbourhood reuse and recycling unit. The idea being that this is a moving, touring set of things which will encourage residents to recycle, reuse. That will include things like textiles, electronics, scrap metal, etc. Basically, a movable visiting feast of ways to dispose of bulky items that takes it down the reuse and recycling stream. The other line of funding is for something called the Tidy Team. So that will be a very visible group of operatives with a vehicle that will go to targeted areas that need, say, a large fly tip removed very quickly, but we're also focusing them on working during unsociable hours, so at weekends, at evenings. If you notice, a lot of waste operations, because it's done in the most optimal, efficient way, finishes probably start very early and finish probably about 3 p.m. So there is a bit of a gap between say when people start coming out to collect children from school, commuting home, and that kind of period where there maybe isn't that much coverage of street cleansing. And certainly encourage people to take us up on our offer of free bags and litter pickers, and how they can go on the app and report that they've got a bag of leaves to be collected, but that's probably not for this evening. Apologies, I've lost thread of where the question was now. Have I? Great, thank you.
Thank you. I've got 2 last questions, one Councillor Hamidi and then Councillor Anand, and then I think we'll call the questions.
I'll keep it brief. Thank you, Chair. On commercial growth, unless I've missed it in the report, what are we doing with businesses in the area? Because obviously we've got companies like Biffa and Suez who are very active. So how are we competing with those companies to try and get commercial contracts from businesses? And what percentage of businesses in the borough do we currently have, if we know?
So apologies, I don't have that to hand, but
I'll that up. Yep. So if you're talking about commercial waste collection rather than commercialisation of the company, so we don't have a particularly large portfolio here in Ealing. It can be quite difficult to compete with the larger providers where they decide that they've got quite a good footprint. They'll just do quite competitive pricing. So we tend to hold the smaller contracts. I think from memory, we hold about 11% of the market. I'm looking for someone to correct me. If that is wrong, I apologise, but it's not a huge percentage of the market, and it tends to be more the smaller businesses where the commercial operators are not interested in competing on price, and we will step in and provide that service on that basis. But it is quite a difficult market to compete in, and yeah, so we're focusing more on the residential collections.
But sorry, Chair, going forward in long-term plan, I guess mid-long-term, is this something that the council is looking to explore and get into more, because that is a business opportunity that it could bring in money for the council if we do offer this service to businesses? So
yeah, so we do offer the service. It's just the council isn't best placed to be competitive on that type of service. We have looked at it before. We've looked at whether we can, attract more customers, whether we can, lower the price. But ultimately, it's not an area that we think we can be that competitive in at the moment.
Thank you. The last question, Anand.
Yes, I'll try and keep it very quick. It's just on commerciability here about recycling can be a good business. Have we looked at situations where we can resell our stuff and separate at source? Cardboard is a good seller. Cans, aluminium cans is a seller. And then even the electrical items that we're collecting, they also go to recycling plants where they can be sold. So are we looking at those revenues, or are we just giving them away?
So I'll pick it up while I've got the mic on. We've got a materials recycling contract that we access through West London Waste Authority. So both they tender the contract on behalf of Ealing and Brent. Within that, there is a pay mechanism, a pay mech that will pick up the different material prices and the volumes that are in the average sort of vehicle that are tipped. So we do have a commercial arrangement there. Those prices will be refreshed on a regular basis to make sure that they're tracking, market rates as well. But a lot of the problems are linked to contamination. So if the load is contaminated, that will obviously lead to an extra charge, or it could lead to it being rejected. So that's what we do around our dry mixed recyclables. In terms of electrical items and things like that, they are part of the extended producer responsibility, and they'll go back through those schemes, and then we gain funding back for the amount of units that we will pick up and put through those schemes as well. So we do, in terms of your question, yes, we do act commercially on both, but they're through wider arrangements, but they do benefit residents in terms of the cost reduction.
Okay, just on the self-separating, are we looking at that as an efficiency? So they're separated at source, so the residents separate everything before it just goes in the blue bin and they separate.
Yeah, so we are looking at that at the moment as part of simpler recycling and the changes that are coming up. So separating out the paper and card, the fibre element, and then there will be requirements to consider separating out other materials. At the moment, we've done what they call a TEEP assessment, is technically, environmental and economically practicable. And that's where we need to weigh up what the cost would be of separating out the separate collection costs versus the benefit on the income that you would get for the separate materials as well. And we've also got to, it's not just a financial assessment, we'd have to have a look again at which properties would be suitable for an additional container, what residents would think about that. And then ultimately, so it's quite a big decision. We are looking at it, we have to look at it, that's part of the requirement. So we will work through that, but it's not something we're going to, go back to the questions earlier from Councillor Rice, it's not something we're just going to suddenly do out of the blue.
Thank you. So has the committee got any specific recommendations to make, Councillor Rice?
I mean, just one thought, just something very simple. I mean, can we do more to actually encourage residents to report where there are leaves that are still causing issues? Because maybe it's something that's not really occurring to people to make reports on. I mean, the irony of this is that in my ward in Northolt, even where we've got a lot of trees, we haven't had issues, really quite serious issues with leafing and the mulch and those kind of things going on. But when I've been going to the more affluent areas of Ealing, there have been some really quite severe problems. And so I don't know, somehow ironically, maybe people in Ealing have not been doing as much to actually report the issues that they do have, but maybe we need to do more to encourage people. Thank you.
Communications campaign.
Yeah, specifically, Councillor Rice, what, some sort of communications campaign, or what are you
just so that
recommending?
people actually realise that there's something that they could do in the same way that they're used to maybe using the app for reporting other issues. Maybe it's not occurring to them to say anything, because it does seem quite odd when you go to different parts and you are seeing issues on different roads. You're actually quite surprised, of why aren't people jumping up and saying something about it and getting it sorted?
Or is it a lack of reporting that's the issue? Is it that, or? Yeah. Councillor Driscoll?
I mean, I would always encourage councillors to escalate reports. Of course, going through the triage email, then escalate. I know I received reports from councillors who looked at neighbourhoods and in their wards and looked at a coherent set of streets so that we had an economically efficient, viable resource deployment. And this year we did have ward ward teams and also response teams. So having that feedback from councillors is crucial to get that information updated. And that did happen this year as well. So councillors, your feedback does count, and it has resulted in response teams being deployed.
So are we happy that that's enough, or? Yeah, okay. And I think, Joe, you had a potential recommendation for us.
That's my formal role, but I think the conversation was going towards, in light of the questions about the value for money assessment. It is quite high level, so a recommendation for a deeper value for money assessment would be feasible.
Yeah. Does the committee agree? Yeah. Thank you. And Councillor Morford?
I think we should sort of commend the establishment of Greener Ealing and what a fantastic impact it's had on customer satisfaction.
Absolutely. Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. And was there any recommendation?
And also add in the staffing side.
Yes.
The success is the investment in staff, and I think that should be tied in.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. And was there anything we could help you with growth we could recommend? Or Councillor Driscoll, you said it kind of grows organically. Is that the way you're happy with it?
I mean, it would be fair to say we're not looking for leaps and bounds.
Yeah.
We're looking for solid, sustainable and appropriate growth. So that's what and that's, at the right time. That's the crux to a sustainable and secure organisation, which I think is where we are with Greener Ealing, looking at opportunities as they arise and also looking horizon scanning, but being appropriate. So how you put that into a recommendation, it's like that horizon scanning and making sure it's an appropriate step forward.
Okay. Councillor Meady.
Sorry, on that, I think it might be worth checking, speaking to other councils and seeing how they can, they're offering competitive pricing to commercial waste companies, because there are councils that are, for example, Luton that I know of, they are significantly cheaper than Biffa or Suez. So there are ways, but maybe speaking to other councils to see what they're doing and learning from them, I guess.
Just maybe that recommendation sounds like maybe like continue to horizon scan for the commercial opportunities with partners. So West London Waste, who we've mentioned a few times, they're obviously a key strategic partner in the waste framework because they manage the disposal. So we, with 6 other boroughs, sit with them, and there's a lot of changes coming up legislatively. There is loads of potentials that could happen. So a broad recommendation like that would absolutely be practical.
Okay, is that agreed? Thank you. I think that draws it to an end. I just have to really congratulate you on your performance and what a difference you've made. So just well done, and thank you very much for coming tonight and presenting to us and answering our questions. Thank you. So that brings me on to item 7, isn't that, which is the work programme. Sam, if you'd like to introduce that, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the next meeting, or the next full meeting in April, is going to be the final meeting of this municipal year of the committee. So we're going to take the Safe Breeding Partnership report, as we always do, sitting as the statutory crime and disorder committee, and alongside that. And the detail of this is going to be worked up with the officers. We're going to take either the youth justice plan or at least it's not really decided yet whether there'll be a separate item or whether it will be combined in the Safe Reading Partnership report. It's the same partners around the table essentially for youth justice, but this will all be bottomed out in a pre-agenda meeting with the chair and vice chair. There are a number of topics that have been sort of put forward and that will continue on to the next year's iteration of the work programme, including it. We've seen Greener Ealing tonight do a report on Broadway Living and Broadway Living RP, which is the other council-owned company, and the suggestion has been put forward to having a look at the various facets of how we manage HMOs in the borough, either through our statutory scheme, licensing scheme, and various enforcement efforts around and regulation efforts around it as well, and just sort of seeing how that all works together. Of course, open to other suggestions going forward. But there'll also be an item in April on scrutiny for next year, as well as we always do, which put forward how it will be managed next year. But of course, that's always going to be a little bit of a hostage to fortune with an election, and there may well be some change in the council, and there may be a different view from the new set of members who will sit on scrutiny. But I think it's always good to have something in place to sort of go forward and to plan from, at least. So that's the work programme. As ever, any suggestions, topics, happy to hear them now or by email, either to myself or the chair or both of us, and we can take them on board really it's probably for next year. So if you have anything that's coming up, just let us know. We can add it to the long list when the chair next year starts to look at things to look at for the following year.
Sam, everybody happy with that? Thank you. Okay, then that brings the meeting to a close. So the date of the next meeting is the 1st of April. I shall see you then. And thank you very much, everyone, for unless it's a call.